single mom shelters, a freezing billionaire, and his son. On New Year's Eve, days later, her life changed forever. On the coldest night of the year, a single mum with a newborn opens her door to a freezing man and his young son, thinking it's just a moment of kindness. She has no idea the man she's feeding once owned half the city, or that he's hiding from a scandal meant to erase him forever. As the days pass, she becomes their only shelter, their only hope, until strangers start asking questions. When the truth finally catches up to them, danger knocks at her door, and she makes a choice no one expects. Will her courage save them all, or cost her everything she has? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. Through the frosted glass of her front door, Maribel could make out two silhouettes, one tall and one small, illuminated by the dim porch light. Her heart drummed against her ribs as she clutched Elijah closer to her chest. The baby stirred but didn't wake, his warm breath steady against her neck. The knocking came again, more urgent this time. "Please," a man's voice called out, rough with desperation. "My son, he's freezing." Maribel peered through the peephole. The man wore what had once been an expensive wool coat, now dirty and torn at one sleeve. His dark hair was dusted with snow, his face gaunt and unshaven. But it was the little boy beside him that made her breath catch, maybe 6 or 7 years old, wrapped in a thin jacket, his lips tinged an alarming shade of blue. "Dear Lord, give me wisdom," she whispered, her hand hovering over the deadbolt. Working nights at Oak Valley Care Home had taught her caution. The city could be dangerous, especially for a woman alone. But those same years of nursing had also trained her to recognize genuine need. The little boy coughed, a hollow sound that seemed to echo in the empty street. That decided it. Maribel couldn't leave a child in this weather, not on New Year's Eve, not ever. She shifted Elijah to one arm and unlocked the door. "Come in, quickly," she said, stepping back to let them enter. Heat rushed out into the night as they hurried inside. Up close, she could see how badly they were shivering. "Thank you," the man said. His voice cracked on the words. "I'm Thaddeus, this is Noah." He placed his hands on the boy's shoulders, protective even in his obvious exhaustion. "I'm Maribel," she replied, closing and locking the door. "And this is Elijah." The baby made a small sound in his sleep, and she patted his back automatically. Noah looked up at her with large, serious eyes in a pale face. "We got lost," he said softly. "The car stopped working, and it's really cold outside." "It sure is, sweetheart." Maribel's nursing instincts took over. "Let's get you warmed up. The living room's through here. I've got the space heater running." She led them into her small, but tidy living room, where a Christmas tree still twinkled in one corner. The space heater hummed steadily, and she'd left her favorite quilt draped over the couch. "Sit down, both of you. Noah, honey, let's get that wet coat off." Thaddeus helped his son out of the jacket, while Maribel carefully laid Elijah in his bassinet. The baby fussed briefly before settling back to sleep. "He's so tiny," Noah whispered, watching the sleeping infant with interest. "Just 3 weeks old," Maribel said, smiling despite her lingering uncertainty. She pulled the quilt off the couch and wrapped it around Noah's shoulders. "There now, how about some hot chocolate to warm you up from the inside?" Noah's eyes lit up, but he looked to his father first. Thaddeus nodded, his shoulders slumping with visible relief. "That's very kind of you." In the kitchen, Maribel kept one eye on her guests while she heated milk on the stove. They didn't look dangerous, just tired and cold and scared. Thaddeus sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, as if afraid to relax, while Noah leaned against him, already growing drowsy in the warmth. "May I ask where you're headed?" she ventured, stirring cocoa powder into the warm milk. Thaddeus was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. "Away," he finally said. "We need to get somewhere safe." His voice held a weight of unspoken words. Maribel poured the hot chocolate into mugs, adding a few mini marshmallows to Noah's. "Here you go, careful now, it's hot." "Thank you, Mom," Noah said, wrapping his small hands around the mug. His fingers were starting to pink up from the warmth, which eased some of Maribel's worry about frostbite. "Just Maribel is fine," she told him with a smile. She settled into her rocking chair, where she'd spent countless hours nursing Elijah these past weeks. "Will you be able to get your car fixed tonight?" "I don't think so," Thaddeus admitted. "Everything's closed for the holiday." He stared into his mug as if it might hold answers. "We'll figure something out. We shouldn't impose. It's nearly midnight on New Year's Eve, and the temperature's dropping below 0. Maribel interrupted gently. "I've got a spare room. You and Noah can stay tonight, get some proper rest." The look Thaddeus gave her was a complex mixture of gratitude and shame. "We can't." "You can," she said firmly. "The room's just gathering dust anyway." She didn't mention that it had been her mother's room before she passed, or how empty the house had felt these past months with just her and Elijah. Noah had already finished his hot chocolate, leaving a marshmallow mustache that he wiped away with his sleeve. His eyelids were growing heavy. "Daddy," he murmured, "I'm really tired." Something in Thaddeus's expression cracked at his son's words. He looked at Maribel, and she saw the moment he accepted that they needed help, needed her help. "Thank you," he said again, and this time the words carried the weight of a prayer. Maribel just nodded, understanding more than she could say. Sometimes the bravest thing wasn't facing danger. It was accepting kindness when you were broken and afraid. "I'll get some clean towels," she said, standing carefully to avoid waking Elijah. "You both look like you could use a hot shower before bed." As she climbed the stairs to the linen closet, she heard Noah's small voice drift up from below. "Daddy, she's nice, like Mom was." The words squeezed Maribel's heart. She paused on the landing, one hand pressed against the wall, and closed her eyes. "Lord," she whispered, "whatever trouble they're running from, whatever they need, please help me help them." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in silence. But inside her modest row house, warmth spread from room to room like a quiet blessing, and 4 souls, 2 broken families, found shelter from the storm. The warmth of Maribel's modest row house enveloped them like a protective cocoon against the bitter winter night outside. She hurried to her linen closet, her arms already missing Elijah's familiar weight, as she'd settled him in his bassinet nearby. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out her warmest blankets and a set of her late father's clothes she hadn't been able to part with. "Here," she said softly, passing the bundle to Thaddeus. His fingers were still blue from the cold as they brushed against hers. "The bathroom's down the hall. You can both change there." Noah stood close to his father, his small frame shivering despite the heat she'd turned up. His eyes kept darting to Elijah, curious but hesitant. "Thank you," Thaddeus managed, his voice rough with emotion. "Noah, come on, buddy." While they changed, Maribel moved quickly in her small kitchen, heating up homemade chicken soup she'd made yesterday. The familiar motions helped calm her racing thoughts about the strangers she'd just invited into her home, but every time she looked at Noah's innocent face, she knew she couldn't have done anything else. When father and son returned, they looked markedly better. Her father's old sweater hung loose on Thaddeus's frame, but at least he was warm. Noah wore one of her old t-shirts as a nightgown, the hem reaching his ankles. "Sit, please." Maribel gestured to her small dining table. "You need to warm up from the inside out." As she ladled out soup into bowls, Elijah's soft coos drew her attention. She scooped him up, cradling him in one arm while she served with the other, a skill she'd mastered quickly in these first weeks of motherhood. Noah's eyes followed her every movement. "The baby's so tiny," he whispered, spooning soup carefully into his mouth. "This is Elijah," Maribel said gently. "He's just 3 weeks old." "Can I—" Noah started, then looked at his father uncertainly. Thaddeus nodded, though Maribel noticed the tension in his shoulders hadn't eased. "What happened to you both?" she asked quietly, settling into a chair with Elijah. Thaddeus stared into his soup bowl, his jaw working. "Family betrayal," he said finally, the words clipped. "My brother, he—" He shook his head, unable to continue. "We lost everything. Our home, our savings. We've been moving from place to place, but tonight—" His voice cracked slightly. "Daddy said we just needed to make it through one more night," Noah added solemnly, making Maribel's heart ache. "Well, you're safe here," she said firmly, though part of her wondered at the wisdom of such a promise to strangers. But as she watched Noah's small shoulders finally relax, she knew she meant it. After the soup was finished, Maribel insisted they take her bedroom. "The bed's big enough for both of you, and the sheets are clean. I'll sleep out here with Elijah." "We couldn't possibly," Thaddeus began, but Maribel cut him off with a gentle but firm shake of her head. "You both need real rest in a real bed. Please." Something in her tone must have reached him because he simply nodded, leading an already drowsy Noah toward her room. Maribel settled on the couch with Elijah, keeping his bassinet close. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as she listened to the unfamiliar sounds of others in her home. Hours later, Elijah's hungry cries woke her. After feeding him, she felt compelled to check on her guests. The door to her bedroom was slightly ajar, and she peered in to see Noah and Thaddeus both sound asleep, Noah curled trustingly against his father's side. As she turned to leave, Noah stirred. "Miss Maribel?" His sleepy voice called softly. She moved closer, not wanting him to wake Thaddeus. "Yes, sweetheart." Noah's eyes, heavy with sleep, fixed on her face. "Mummy says you're my daddy now," he whispered. Maribel felt her breath catch in her throat. She glanced at Thaddeus and saw his eyes were open, glistening in the darkness. The weight of Noah's words, and whatever story lay behind them, seemed to fill the room. Unable to find words, Maribel reached out and smoothed Noah's hair back from his forehead. He smiled sleepily and drifted back to sleep. But the moment stayed suspended between her and Thaddeus, full of unspoken questions. Back on her couch, Maribel held Elijah close as he nursed, her mind tumbling with thoughts of mothers and fathers, loss and providence. She found herself doing what she always did in moments of uncertainty. She prayed. "Lord," she whispered, her eyes moving from Elijah's peaceful face toward her bedroom where Noah and Thaddeus slept. "Watch over these children, all of them. Guide us. Help me understand what you're asking of me." She touched Elijah's soft cheek, felt Noah's words echo in her heart, and continued her silent prayers into the deep of night. The darkness pressed against her windows, but inside, the warmth held them all safe. These strangers bound together by one cold New Year's Eve and a child's trusting words about new kinds of family. The pale winter sunlight crept through Maribel's living room curtains as New Year's Day dawned. She blinked awake on the couch, her neck stiff from the awkward sleeping position. Beside her in the portable bassinet, Elijah stirred and made small noises that she recognized as his hungry sounds. The digital clock on her DVD player showed 5:30 in the morning. "Okay, sweet boy," she whispered, lifting him carefully. "Mama's here." Her body ached as she prepared his bottle with practiced movements. The house was quiet except for the soft whir of the heating system. Upstairs, her unexpected guests slept in her bedroom, a fact that still felt surreal in the early morning light. As she settled into her worn armchair to feed Elijah, heavy footsteps creaked on the stairs. Thaddeus appeared, his borrowed sweatpants slightly too short, showing his ankles. His face held the drawn look of someone who hadn't slept well. "I heard the baby," he said softly. "Can I help?" Maribel hesitated, then nodded toward the kitchen. "There's coffee in the cabinet above the sink. The maker's old, but it works." While Thaddeus moved quietly in her kitchen, Maribel focused on Elijah, who suckled contentedly at his bottle. His dark eyes fixed on her face with that intense baby stare that made her heart melt every time. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the air with its familiar aroma. "Noah's still sleeping," Thaddeus said, returning with 2 mugs. He set one carefully on the side table next to her. "Thank you again for everything." She nodded, shifting Elijah to her shoulder for burping. "You're welcome. Though I have to admit, this isn't how I expected to start my new year." A ghost of a smile crossed Thaddeus's tired face. "Me neither." When Elijah fussed after burping, Thaddeus surprised her by holding out his arms. "May I? Sometimes a change helps." Maribel watched as he cradled her son with unexpected skill, his large hands gentle and sure. Elijah settled almost immediately, making those little sighing sounds that meant contentment. "You've done this before," she observed, sipping her coffee. "Noah was colicky," he said, swaying slightly as he held Elijah. "I learned every trick I could find. His mother?" He stopped, pain flashing across his face. "Well, we spent a lot of nights walking the floors." The morning passed in a blur of baby care and quiet conversations. Noah woke around 8, shy but hungry, and Maribel made pancakes while Thaddeus kept Elijah calm in the living room. The domesticity of it felt strange, yet somehow natural, like a puzzle piece clicking into place that she hadn't known was missing. By 10 o'clock, Elijah was demanding attention again. Exhaustion pressed against Maribel's temples as she prepared another bottle. The lack of proper sleep was catching up with her, making her movements slow and clumsy. "Let me," Thaddeus said, taking the bottle and baby. "You should rest." "I need to get ready for church," she said, stifling a yawn. "Sunday service starts at 11. Thaddeus looked uncertain. "We shouldn't impose—" "You're welcome to come," she said, surprising herself with the invitation. "The roads are still bad from the storm, and Pastor Matthews always says New Year's service is for everyone." Noah perked up from where he was drawing at the kitchen table. "Can we, Dad?" Something in Thaddeus's expression softened as he looked at his son. "If you're sure it's no trouble." Getting everyone ready proved to be an adventure. Maribel found an old winter coat of her brother's that mostly fit Thaddeus, and Noah wore a sweater she'd been meaning to donate. Elijah needed a diaper change just as they were leaving, and then another as soon as they arrived at the small brick church. The regular congregation members tried to hide their curious glances, but Maribel felt them all the same. She saw Mrs. Wilson whisper behind her hand to Miss Joyce, their eyes darting between her and Thaddeus. But then Pastor Matthews began the service, his warm voice filling the sanctuary with words about God's mysterious ways and the blessings found in unexpected places. In Matthew 25:35, the pastor said, his kind eyes scanning the congregation, "Jesus tells us, 'I was a stranger, and you invited me in.' Sometimes the greatest acts of faith are the simplest, opening our doors, opening our hearts." Beside her, Thaddeus sat very still, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Noah leaned against his father's arm, drawing patterns on the church bulletin with a stubby pencil. In Maribel's arms, Elijah slept peacefully, unaware of the way the pastor's words seemed to hover in the air like a blessing. After service, as people filed out into the cold January afternoon, Pastor Matthews stopped them at the door. His weathered face crinkled into a smile as he looked at Elijah. "Beautiful family," he said, and before Maribel could correct him, added, "God brings people together in mysterious ways, doesn't he?" The drive home was quiet. Snow still piled high along the streets. Bus service remained suspended due to the weather, and Maribel found herself saying, "You're welcome to stay another night, until things clear up." That evening, after a simple dinner of soup and sandwiches, Thaddeus noticed the loose hinge on her kitchen door. Without being asked, he found her toolbox in the utility closet and set about fixing it. Maribel watched him work, noting the precise way he handled the screwdriver, the careful attention he paid to not damaging the wood. His movement spoke of someone used to fixing things, someone who knew the value of maintenance and care. "There," he said finally, swinging the door smoothly on its newly tightened hinge. "That should stop the squeaking." "Thank you," she said, bouncing Elijah gently as he fussed. "You didn't have to do that. It's the least I can do." He put the tools away with methodical care, each one back in its proper place. "I noticed the bathroom faucet drips too. I could look at that tomorrow, if you'd like." The offer hung in the air between them, speaking of both competence and restraint. Here was a man who could fix things but waited to be invited, who had skills but didn't use them to show off. Maribel found herself nodding, even as Elijah finally settled against her shoulder. "That would be nice," she said softly, watching as Noah showed Thaddeus his drawings from church, the little family tableau playing out in her kitchen as naturally as if they belonged there. The morning sun cast long shadows across Maribel's small kitchen as she balanced Elijah against her shoulder, gently patting his back while scanning the newspaper's job listings. Thaddeus sat across from her at the worn kitchen table, his shoulders hunched as he made notes on a borrowed notepad. "There's a warehouse looking for general labor," Maribel said softly, mindful of Elijah's drowsy state. "And the grocery store down on 5th Street usually hires after New Year's." Thaddeus nodded, his pen scratching against the paper. "Thank you, I'll need to figure out how to apply without—" His voice trailed off, and he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Without ID?" Maribel finished gently. She'd noticed how he'd tensed up earlier when she'd mentioned filling out job applications. "Yes." His answer was barely above a whisper. "It's complicated." Noah sat on the living room floor nearby, running a toy car along the baseboards. He'd been watching Maribel all morning with curious eyes, especially when she tended to Elijah. Every time the baby made a sound, Noah's head would pop up, attention immediately drawn to them. "Miss Maribel," Noah called out, "can I hold the baby when he wakes up?" She smiled warmly at him. "Maybe later, sweetheart. We'll need to be very careful and gentle." Elijah finally drifted off to sleep, his tiny breaths warm against her neck. Maribel carefully laid him in the portable bassinet she'd set up in the living room. She watched as Noah crept closer to peek at the sleeping baby, his face full of wonder. "He's so little," Noah whispered. "He sure is." Maribel tucked the blanket around Elijah, then turned her attention back to the task at hand. "I know some shelters that might have space," she said to Thaddeus, keeping her voice low. "The one on Marshall Street is pretty good. Clean. Safe." Something flickered across Thaddeus's face. "I appreciate it, but—" He glanced at Noah, then back to Maribel. "The fewer questions asked, the better. For now." Maribel nodded, though concern nagged at her. Every attempt to help seemed to hit a wall of secrecy. She understood the need for privacy, but his careful avoidance of anything official was troubling. While Elijah napped, she gathered up the laundry that had been sitting in the dryer since yesterday. The familiar task of folding helped settle her thoughts. Noah trailed after her to the kitchen, where she'd set up the laundry basket on the counter. "Can I help?" he asked, reaching for a washcloth. "Of course, honey." She showed him how to match up the corners of the towels. As they worked together, Noah chatted about everything and nothing. His favorite colors, what animals he liked best, how soft the baby's blankets were. The radio played quietly in the background, mostly forgotten until a particular news segment caught Maribel's attention. She stilled, a half-folded shirt in her hands, as the announcer's voice cut through the morning quiet. Still no leads in the disappearance of disgraced developer Thaddeus Rowe, who vanished following allegations of massive financial fraud. The billionaire businessman is accused of orchestrating a complex scheme that resulted in losses estimated at over $200 million. Rowe was last seen 3 days ago, shortly after his brother and business partner Marcus Rowe released documents implicating him in the fraud. Investigators are particularly concerned about the whereabouts of Rowe's young son, Noah. The shirt slipped from Maribel's suddenly numb fingers. She gripped the counter's edge, her knees weak. The man in her guest room, the quiet, humble man who'd been so gentle with her baby, was a fugitive billionaire accused of stealing millions. Her mind raced back through every interaction, every careful dodge of personal questions, every moment of tension when anything official was mentioned. It all made terrible sense now. The missing ID, the reluctance to go to shelters, the vague references to family betrayal. Noah continued folding washcloths, completely unaware of her distress. "Miss Maribel, did I do this right?" She forced her hands to stop shaking as she looked at his innocent face. "Yes, sweetie, that's perfect." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. From the living room came Elijah's first stirrings of awakening. The familiar sound anchored her, even as her world tilted on its axis. She could hear Thaddeus's footsteps moving toward the bassinet, probably to check on the baby. The same man who, according to the radio, had stolen more money than she could even imagine. Maribel's fingers pressed harder into the counter's surface. The truth sat heavy in her chest, but she kept her face carefully neutral as Noah showed her another folded washcloth. Her mind spun with questions. Was he guilty? Was Noah in danger? Were they all in danger? What was she supposed to do with this information? The weight of knowledge pressed down on her shoulders as she heard Thaddeus softly shushing Elijah in the next room. The man she'd welcomed into her home, who'd sat at her table and slept under her roof, who'd shown such tenderness toward both children. He carried secrets far darker than she'd imagined. Her hands trembled as she reached for another towel to fold, but she forced them steady. Noah was still watching her, and Thaddeus was just in the next room. She couldn't let either of them see how shaken she was. Not yet. Not until she figured out what to do with this terrible knowledge. The radio droned on, shifting to weather reports and local news, but Maribel barely heard it. Her world had narrowed to the sound of her own heartbeat and the weight of silence pressing against her lips. She stood in her kitchen, folding laundry with a child who didn't know his father was the subject of a nationwide manhunt, while that very man soothed her baby in the next room. The morning light streaming through her window felt colder now, harder somehow. She drew a deep breath, then another, her fingers mechanically continuing their work while her mind raced. The truth was there now, impossible to unknow, leaving her caught between compassion and fear, between what was right and what was safe. Noah hummed quietly beside her, carefully matching up corners just as she'd shown him, while through the doorway she could hear Thaddeus's gentle murmuring to Elijah. The ordinary domestic sounds felt surreal now, painted in different colors by what she knew. Maribel gripped the counter again, steadying herself against the weight of this knowledge, searching for guidance in the silence of her racing thoughts. The evening stretched long and tense in Maribel's small row house. She had put away the last of the dishes, her movements careful and measured as she glanced at Thaddeus reading quietly to Noah on the couch. The radio's revelations echoed in her mind, each detail more troubling than the last. Elijah fussed in his bassinet, drawing her attention. She lifted him gently, swaying back and forth while humming an old hymn her grandmother used to sing. His tiny fingers curled around her thumb as she paced, her heart heavy with the weight of what she'd learned. "Come on, sweet boy," she whispered. "Time for sleep." It took 3 lullabies and countless gentle rocks before Elijah's eyes finally fluttered closed. She placed him in his crib with tender care, touching his soft cheek one last time before turning to face what needed to be done. Noah had fallen asleep on the couch, his small form curled under a blanket. Thaddeus sat beside him, one hand resting protectively on his son's shoulder. "We need to talk," Maribel said quietly, gesturing toward the kitchen. Something in her tone made Thaddeus straighten. He followed her, his footsteps hesitant on the worn linoleum floor. The kitchen's fluorescent light cast harsh shadows across his face, stripping away the careful anonymity he'd maintained. "I heard something interesting on the radio today," Maribel began, her voice low but firm, "about a missing billionaire named Thaddeus Rowe." The change in his posture was immediate. His shoulders tensed, and his eyes darted toward the doorway where Noah slept. "How long were you planning to hide this?" she asked. Thaddeus sank into one of the kitchen chairs, running a hand over his face. "I didn't know how to tell you," he admitted. "The moment you know something, you become involved. I couldn't risk that. I became involved the moment I opened my door," Maribel countered, sitting across from him. "I deserve the truth. All of it." He nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the scratched surface of her kitchen table. "It was my brother Malcolm," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "We built the company together, but somewhere along the way success changed him. Or maybe it just revealed who he always was." Maribel listened as the story unfolded. Thaddeus described a carefully orchestrated betrayal, falsified documents, manipulated board meetings, and a media campaign designed to destroy his reputation. His brother had orchestrated everything, using their shared past to make the lies seem truthful. "The fraud allegations," she prompted. "Fabricated," Thaddeus said, his hands clenching into fists. "Malcolm created a paper trail making it look like I'd been embezzling funds for years. By the time I realized what was happening, he'd turned everyone against me. The board, the shareholders, even some of my closest friends. And you ran?" Maribel's tone held no judgment, just quiet understanding. "I had to." His eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. "Noah's mother died 2 years ago. He's all I have left. Malcolm was trying to get custody, claiming I was unstable and unfit. I couldn't—" His voice broke. "I couldn't let him take my son." Maribel thought of Elijah sleeping in the next room, of the fierce protectiveness that filled her heart whenever she looked at him. "I understand," she said softly. "Do you?" Thaddeus looked up, his expression raw with vulnerability. "You've opened your home to us, shared your food, your space, and I've repaid that kindness with lies." "Not lies," Maribel corrected. "Omissions, made out of fear and love for your child." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "I'm a mother too. There's nothing I wouldn't do to protect my son." The kitchen fell silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and Noah's distant, steady breathing. "What happens now?" Thaddeus asked finally. Maribel stood, walking to the sink to fill a glass of water. Her reflection in the window above the sink looked tired but resolved. "You can stay," she said. "For now, but we need a plan. You can't run forever." "I know." He accepted the water she offered, his hands trembling slightly. "But I don't know how to fight this. Malcolm has everything. Money, influence, the media. I have nothing." "You have the truth," Maribel said firmly. "And sometimes that's enough to start with." A sudden knock at the door cut through their conversation like a knife. They both froze, staring at each other as heavy footsteps creaked on the porch outside. Through the thin walls, a man's voice called out, clear and professional. "Good evening. I'm looking for someone. A man matching Thaddeus Rowe's description was seen in this area." Maribel's heart pounded in her chest as she watched fear flash across Thaddeus's face. In the living room, Noah stirred slightly in his sleep. And from the nursery came the first whimpers of Elijah beginning to wake. The knock came again, more insistent this time, echoing through the small house like a warning. The truth had found them sooner than they'd expected. Now they had to decide what to do with it. Maribel woke before dawn, her body automatically responding to Elijah's soft whimpers. The house was quiet except for the gentle creaking of floorboards as she padded to his crib. Morning light barely filtered through the thin curtains, casting everything in shades of grey. "Good morning, sweet boy," she whispered, lifting him carefully. His tiny fingers curled around her thumb as she changed him and settled into the rocking chair for his morning feeding. The events of last night's confrontation weighed heavily on her mind. A stranger asking questions meant trouble, and as a mother, she couldn't ignore the potential danger. Elijah's peaceful nursing reminded her of everything she had to protect. Heavy footsteps in. The hallway announced Thaddeus's presence. He appeared in the doorway, already dressed, his face drawn with worry. Maribel adjusted the light blanket covering her and Elijah before speaking. "We need to talk about that visitor," she said quietly, keeping her voice steady. "Someone's looking for you, and I need to know exactly what we're dealing with." Thaddeus sank into the chair across from her, running his hands through his disheveled hair. "It's Malcolm," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "He's hired private investigators to track me down, professional ones who know how to dig deep and ask the right questions." "Why?" Maribel asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Control," Thaddeus replied, his jaw tightening. "As long as I'm out here, I'm a loose end. A threat. He needs to know where I am, what I might do next." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Malcolm doesn't just want my money and my company. He wants to make sure I can never rebuild, never tell my side of the story." Elijah finished nursing, and Maribel carefully adjusted her clothing before lifting him to her shoulder for burping. The familiar motion helped calm her racing thoughts. "Listen to me carefully," she said, her voice firm but kind. "If you're staying here, we need some ground rules. First, no more lies, to me or anyone else. Second, you don't just disappear on us. And most importantly," she gazed down at Elijah's tiny face, "nothing you do puts my baby at risk. Are we clear?" Thaddeus nodded solemnly. "Crystal clear. I wouldn't want it any other way." "Good. Now, let's talk about practical things." Maribel stood, placing Elijah in his swing. "You need to learn how to live without all that money and power. Real life isn't corporate boardrooms and private jets." Throughout the morning, Maribel gave Thaddeus a crash course in everyday survival. In the kitchen, she showed him how to plan meals on a budget, spreading store circulars across the table while Elijah dozed. Nearby, "These are the sale items this week," she explained, circling prices with a pencil. "You can feed a family of 3 for under $50 if you shop smart and cook from scratch." Thaddeus stared at the numbers, looking slightly overwhelmed. I've never actually cooked anything. Well, today's your lucky day. Maribel smiled, pulling out a worn cookbook. We're starting with basics: rice, beans, simple vegetables. Nothing fancy, but it'll keep you fed. They moved on to transportation, standing at the bus stop with Elijah bundled against her chest in a carrier. Thaddeus watched carefully as she explained the route map and fare system. Memorize the schedule, she advised, bouncing slightly to keep Elijah content. The number 11 will take you downtown, where most of the day labor offices are. Being late means no work, so always plan to arrive early. As they rode the bus, Maribel noticed how Thaddeus observed everything, the way people swiped their passes, the unspoken rules of seating, the pull cord signal for stops. His humility in learning touched something in her heart, though she kept her expression neutral. Back at home, she taught him to cook rice on her old stove. Watch the heat, she instructed, adjusting the flame. Too high and it burns, too low and it never cooks right. Cooking's all about patience and paying attention. Thaddeus stirred the pot carefully, his expression one of intense concentration. Noah watched from the doorway, fascinated by seeing his father in such an unfamiliar role. "Can I help?" Noah asked shyly. "Come here." Maribel smiled, pulling up a chair for him. "You can be our official taste tester." As evening approached, Maribel noticed Thaddeus growing more confident with these simple tasks. He managed to heat bottles for Elijah without help, and even figured out how to run the ancient washing machine in the basement. After dinner, while Maribel sat in her favorite chair, feeding Elijah his last meal of the day, something caught her eye through the window. A dark sedan, probably a late-model American make, sat idling across the street. The streetlight reflected off its tinted windows, making it impossible to see inside. Her heart rate quickened, but she forced herself to remain calm, continuing to rock Elijah as she watched. 1 minute passed, then 5. The car remained, engine running, lights off. "Thaddeus," she called softly, not taking her eyes from the window. "Come here a moment." He appeared at her side, following her gaze to the street. His body tensed immediately, but he kept his voice low and steady. "How long has it been there?" "At least 5 minutes. Maybe longer before I noticed." Maribel held Elijah closer, his warm weight providing comfort against the chill of fear creeping up her spine. "Is this normal? For your brother's people?" "Yes," Thaddeus admitted, his face grim. "They like to establish patterns, figure out routines. They're patient. It's what makes them good at their jobs." Maribel watched as Elijah's eyes grew heavy with sleep, his tiny hands relaxing against her chest. The contrast between his peaceful innocence and the threatening presence outside her home made her stomach twist. "We need to be smarter than them," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "More careful. Starting tomorrow, we vary our schedules, take different routes, never be predictable." Thaddeus nodded, his eyes still fixed on the sedan. "I'm sorry, Maribel. I never meant to bring this to your door." "Well, it's here now," she replied pragmatically, though her heart was racing. "We'll deal with it. But remember our agreement. Elijah's safety comes first, always." The car remained there, a dark shadow in the night, as Maribel finished feeding her son and prepared him for bed. She moved through her evening routine with deliberate normalcy, all while her mind worked overtime, planning and preparing for whatever might come next. Morning sunlight filtered through Maribel's kitchen window as she warmed a bottle for Elijah. Her eyes felt heavy from another night of broken sleep, but the familiar routine of caring for her son brought comfort. The gentle whirring of the bottle, warmer filled the quiet kitchen while Noah sat at the table, carefully coloring in a second-hand coloring book she'd found in her closet. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. Thaddeus, who had been washing dishes, tensed immediately. "Stay back," Maribel whispered, adjusting Elijah in her arms. Through the peephole, she saw Mr. Peterson, her landlord, shifting impatiently on her doorstep. Her stomach tightened as she opened the door. "Morning, Miss Jameson." Mr. Peterson's eyes darted past her shoulder into the apartment. "We need to talk about your guests." Maribel straightened her spine, though exhaustion pulled at her shoulders. "Good morning, Mr. Peterson. Would you like to step inside?" "No need." He crossed his arms. "Your lease clearly states no long terms. Visitors without proper registration. Several neighbors have reported men coming and going from your unit." The way he said "men" made her skin prickle. She'd dealt with this kind of subtle prejudice before, but it still stung. "They're family friends who needed emergency shelter during the storm," Maribel explained, keeping her voice steady. "It's temporary, and they've caused no disturbance." "With a newborn in the house?" Mr. Peterson raised his eyebrows. "Seems irresponsible to me. You understand my concerns about liability." Before Maribel could respond, Mrs. Turner from next door walked past, pausing to join the conversation uninvited. "I was just saying to my Harold how worried I was about all this," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "A single mother with a tiny baby, taking in strange men. It's not safe, dear." Maribel felt heat rise in her cheeks. The familiar weight of judgment pressed down on her shoulders. The same judgment she'd faced throughout her pregnancy, working double shifts at the nursing home until her 8th month, enduring whispers and sidelong glances. "I appreciate your concern," Maribel said firmly, "but I'm capable of making decisions for my family's safety." Elijah stirred in her arms, and she instinctively swayed to soothe him. "Well, you have until the end of the week to sort this out," Mr. Peterson declared. "After that, we'll need to discuss your lease terms." After they left, Maribel closed the door and leaned against it, taking deep breaths. When she opened her eyes, Thaddeus stood nearby, his face tight with concern. "We should go," he said quietly. "I won't put you and Elijah at risk, or cause you to lose your home." Maribel shook her head firmly. "No, that's exactly what they expect me to do. Bend to pressure, stay in my lane, don't make waves." She walked to the kitchen to finish preparing Elijah's bottle. "I've spent my whole life being underestimated, being told what I can't or shouldn't do." She settled into her worn armchair to feed Elijah, and Noah came to sit cross-legged on the floor beside her. Thaddeus took a seat on the couch, listening intently as she continued. "When I got pregnant with Elijah, people at work started treating me differently. Like I was suddenly fragile, incapable. The same people who'd seen me handle 12-hour shifts caring for elderly patients suddenly thought I couldn't make good decisions." She smiled down at Elijah, who was drinking contentedly. "But I knew what I was capable of. I worked extra shifts to save money. I prepared everything myself, and when Elijah came 3 weeks early, I handled that too." "You're the strongest person I've ever met," Thaddeus said softly. "Not strong," Maribel corrected. "Just used to doing what needs to be done, whether people understand it or not. And right now, what needs to be done is helping you and Noah stay safe." Noah looked up from his coloring. "But what if they make us leave?" "Nobody's making anyone leave," Maribel assured him. "Sometimes people think they know what's best for others without actually knowing their story. But we know our story, don't we?" The day passed slowly. Maribel went about her routine, feeding Elijah, doing laundry, preparing simple meals. Thaddeus helped where he could, and Noah became her little shadow, eager to fetch diapers or burp cloths when needed. As evening approached, Maribel sat with Noah while Thaddeus gave Elijah his bottle. He'd gotten quite good at it over the past few days. Noah leaned against her side, his small body warm and trusting. "Maribel," he asked in a small voice, If they take Daddy away, will you still be here?" The question broke her heart. She turned to face him fully, taking his small hands in hers. "Noah, listen to me. No matter what happens, I will always be here for you. Always. Do you understand?" Noah nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Promise? I promise." She pulled him into a tight hug, meeting Thaddeus's gaze over Noah's shoulder. His eyes were filled with gratitude and something deeper. Trust, perhaps, or hope. Later that night, after both children were asleep, Maribel and Thaddeus sat at the kitchen table, sharing mugs of tea. The day's tensions had left them both drained, but somehow stronger in their resolve. "You could have taken the easy way out today," Thaddeus said. "Nobody would have blamed you for asking us to leave." Maribel wrapped her hands around her warm mug. "The easy way isn't always the right way, and the right way isn't always understood by others." She smiled tiredly. "Besides, I meant what I said to Noah. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. Not until we figure this out together." "Thank you," Thaddeus whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "For seeing us as people worth protecting, not problems to solve." "That's what family does," Maribel replied simply, and was rewarded with Thaddeus's first real smile of the day. Through the window, the city lights twinkled against the dark sky. In her bedroom, Elijah slept peacefully in his bassinet, while Noah's gentle breathing came from the living room couch. Despite the pressures of the day, or perhaps because of them, Maribel felt more certain than ever that she was doing the right thing. Sometimes, she realized, the strongest act of defiance was simply standing your ground and choosing kindness, no matter what others might think. The power went out with a soft hum, plunging Maribel's modest row house into darkness. Outside, the winter wind whistled through bare branches, but inside, a gentle warmth spread as Maribel lit candles one by one. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an almost sacred atmosphere. "I have some emergency supplies in the kitchen," Maribel said, her voice hushed to avoid waking Elijah, who had just fallen asleep in his bassinet. She returned with more candles and a battery-powered lantern, setting them carefully around the living room. Noah, already in his pajamas, curled up on the couch beside his father. "It's like camping," he whispered excitedly, pulling a blanket up to his chin. The candlelight softened Thaddeus's usually guarded features as he smiled at his son. "Remember when we used to go camping with Mom?" he asked gently, running his hand through Noah's hair. Noah nodded, his eyes growing distant with memory. "She always brought hot chocolate in that big blue thermos." "That's right," Thaddeus said, his voice catching slightly. "Elena never went anywhere without that thermos." Maribel settled into her armchair, drawing her legs up beneath her. The mention of Noah's mother hung in the air like a delicate thread, and she remained quiet, allowing Thaddeus the space to continue if he chose. "Elena loved the outdoors," Thaddeus said after a moment, his eyes fixed on the candlelight. "She used to say nature was God's way of reminding us what really matters. When I was caught up in business deals and board meetings, she'd pack up our tent and practically drag me away from the office." Noah leaned against his father. "Tell about the time Mom found the baby deer." A genuine smile crossed Thaddeus's face. "We were hiking, and Elena spotted this tiny fawn hidden in some bushes. Instead of trying to touch it or move it, she made us sit perfectly still for 2 hours until its mother came back." He shook his head. That was Elena. She had endless patience when it came to caring for others. From the bassinet, Elijah made a small sound. Maribel started to rise, but Thaddeus was already on his feet. "May I?" he asked. Maribel nodded, watching as he lifted Elijah with careful hands. The tenderness in his movements touched something deep in her heart. After Elena died, Thaddeus continued softly, cradling Elijah. Noah became my anchor. Every morning, just getting him ready for school gave me a reason to keep going. When everything fell apart with Malcolm protecting, Noah was the only thing that mattered. The baby settled against Thaddeus's chest, tiny fingers curling into his shirt. Maribel felt tears prick at her eyes, remembering her own lonely nights after Elijah was born. Sometimes, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, I'm so tired I can barely think straight. The nights feel endless, and I wonder if I'm strong enough to do this alone. She wiped at her eyes. Then Elijah looks at me with complete trust, and I remember God didn't give me more than I can handle, even if I need help handling it. Noah slipped off the couch and came to sit by Maribel's feet, leaning his head against her knee. The simple gesture of trust nearly undid her. I used to think strength meant never needing help, Thaddeus said. Elena taught me different. And now, he looked around the candlelit room at this makeshift family gathered in the darkness. Now I'm learning it all over again. Elijah began to fuss, and Maribel reached for him, instinctively. As she settled him to nurse, covered by a light blanket, she felt the weight of unspoken words. Would you like to pray together? She asked quietly. Thaddeus's expression shifted, vulnerability replacing his usual careful control. I haven't prayed since Elena died, he admitted. I was too angry. God can handle our anger, Maribel said gently. He gave us that emotion too. Noah reached for his father's hand, and Thaddeus sank to his knees beside them. Maribel's clear voice filled the candlelit room. Dear Lord, we come to you as we are, tired, uncertain, carrying burdens too heavy for us alone. We thank you for bringing us together in this moment, for the gift of understanding and the grace of new beginnings. Thank you for Maribel and Elijah, Noah added spontaneously, making Maribel's heart swell. Yes. Thaddeus's voice was rough with emotion. Thank you for showing mercy through the kindness of others, for giving me a chance to remember what Elena always knew, that love is stronger than fear. His shoulders shook slightly. Please forgive me for losing my way. As they said Amen together, Maribel saw tears streaming down Thaddeus's face in the candlelight. But they weren't tears of despair. They held the cleansing power of release, of burdens finally shared. Noah hugged his father tightly, and Thaddeus held him close, pressing a kiss to his son's head. Elijah made a contented sound as he nursed, and Maribel felt a deep peace settle over the room. In that moment, surrounded by flickering candles and shared prayers, they weren't a disgraced billionaire, a struggling single mother, and two children from different worlds. They were simply souls finding comfort in each other's presence, bound together by something greater than circumstance. The power was still out, but the darkness held no fear. Instead, it felt like a gentle reminder that sometimes we need to let go of our artificial lights to see what truly illuminates our path. Look, Noah whispered, pointing to the window. Through the glass, snowflakes had begun to fall, catching the glow of the streetlights like tiny stars drifting down from heaven. A reminder that even in the coldest seasons, beauty finds its way to earth. The morning dawned cold and grey, a stark contrast to the warmth of the previous night's candlelit gathering. Maribel hummed softly as she warmed Elijah's bottle in the kitchen, her body swaying in the familiar dance of motherhood. The baby nestled against her chest in his pale blue onesie, making those tiny sounds that filled her heart. Through the window, she watched Thaddeus and Noah building a small snowman in her tiny backyard. Noah's laughter drifted through the thin walls, and she smiled at how different the boy seemed from the shivering child who had appeared on her doorstep less than a week ago. The sharp knock made her jump. Elijah startled at her sudden movement, his face scrunching up in preparation for a cry. "Shh, baby. Boy," she whispered, patting his back. "It's okay. Mama's got you." But the knocking came again. Harder this time. Official. Demanding. "Police, open up." The word sent ice through her veins. Through the window she saw Thaddeus freeze mid-motion, a handful of snow suspended in the air. Noah looked up at his father, confusion clouding his face. "Ms. Jameson, this is the Philadelphia Police Department. Open the door immediately." Maribel's legs felt weak as she walked to the door, Elijah clutched close. Her hand trembled as she turned the knob. 4 police officers stood on her narrow stoop, their badges glinting in the winter light. Behind them, 2 men in dark suits held up credentials. "FBI," one announced grimly. "Ms. Maribel Jameson?" A female officer stepped forward, holding up a document. "We have a warrant to search these premises." The world seemed to tilt sideways as officers pushed past her into her home. Elijah began to cry, his wails piercing the chaos as uniforms spread through her small house. "Ma'am, we have reason to believe you're harboring Thaddeus Rowe, a fugitive wanted for questioning in a federal investigation." The FBI agent's voice was cold, professional. "You're facing potential charges of harboring a fugitive and child endangerment." "Child endangerment?" The words came out as a whisper. She held Elijah tighter, his cries growing louder. The back door opened, and officers led Thaddeus in, his hands already cuffed behind his back. Snow clung to his jeans where he'd been kneeling with Noah. His eyes met hers, filled with a mixture of resignation and despair. "I'm sorry," he mouthed silently. Noah burst through the door behind him. "No, Daddy!" His small face was red with panic, tears already streaming. "You can't take him. Maribel, don't let them." A social worker appeared, seemingly from nowhere, reaching for Noah. "Come with me, sweetheart. Everything's going to be okay." "No!" Noah twisted away, running to Maribel, his arms wrapped around her legs as he sobbed. "Don't let them take me. You promised you'd protect me." Maribel's heart shattered. She wanted to drop to her knees to gather Noah close, but Elijah's screams had reached a fever pitch. She could only stand there, one hand on Noah's head as the social worker gently but firmly pulled him away. "Ms. Jameson." The female officer's voice cut through the chaos. "We need to ask you some questions about your involvement." Through her front window, Maribel could see her neighbors gathering on the street, drawn by the police cars and commotion. Mrs. Patterson from next door stood with her arms crossed, shaking her head. Mr. Rodriguez from across the street was filming with his phone. "Did you know Mr. Rowe's true identity when you took him in?" the FBI agent was asking. Maribel's throat felt too tight to speak. "Were you aware he was fleeing a federal investigation?" "Please," she managed. "My baby needs his bottle. He's hungry." But they kept asking questions as Thaddeus was led out the front door. The neighbors' whispers grew louder. Someone had called the local news. A van with a satellite dish was pulling up. Noah's screams echoed from the street as the social worker tried to get him into a car. Maribel, you said you'd be there. You promised." Thaddeus turned at the police car, his face etched with pain. "I'll fix this," he called out. "Maribel, I'll make this right." Then they were gone. The FBI agents followed, leaving only a card with contact information and a warning not to leave town. The police officers filed out, their boots tracking slush across her clean floors. The silence that followed was deafening. Maribel stood in her living room, gently bouncing Elijah, who had cried himself into hiccups. The bottle she'd been warming was still in the kitchen, probably cold now. Outside, the neighbors lingered, their faces pressed against her chain-link fence like spectators at a zoo. Her eyes fell on Noah's coat, thrown carelessly across the couch where he'd left it the night before. Thaddeus's coffee mug sat half empty on the side table. The prayer they'd shared last night felt like a dream, dissolved in the harsh light of morning. Elijah whimpered softly against her chest. She looked down at his tiny face, his eyes still wet with tears, and whispered, "What have I done, baby? What have I done?" The words echoed in her empty house. The same house that just yesterday had been full of candlelight and prayer, of shared meals and quiet understanding. Now it felt hollow, stripped bare by the intrusion of authority and judgment. She sank into her rocking chair, still holding Elijah close. Through her window, she could see the half-finished snowman in her backyard, abandoned mid-creation. Noah's small handprints were still visible in the snow beside it. The weight of consequence pressed down on her shoulders as she rocked, her mind replaying every moment since she'd opened her door on that snowy New Year's Eve. She'd followed her heart, her faith. She'd done what she believed was right. But now, sitting alone in her silent house with only her baby's soft breathing for company, Maribel faced the question that had haunted good people throughout history. Had the price of compassion been too high? Dawn broke cold and grey over Maribel's row house, but she had been awake for hours. Elijah's soft whimpers punctuated the silence as she changed his diaper and prepared a bottle with trembling hands. The events of yesterday kept replaying in her mind. Thaddeus being led away in handcuffs, Noah's heart-wrenching screams, the accusations that she had endangered her own child. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. 2 detectives stood outside, their faces stern. "Ms. Jameson, we need you to come down to the station for questioning." Maribel clutched Elijah closer. "I need to arrange childcare first." "We've already contacted social services. They'll watch your baby during the interview." Her heart clenched at the thought of being separated from Elijah, but she knew refusing would only make things worse. With shaking hands, she packed his diaper bag and followed the detectives to their car. The interrogation room was deliberately cold, its harsh fluorescent lights making her head pound. Elijah fussed in a social worker's arms just outside the door, his cries piercing through the glass. Maribel's breasts ached, knowing it was nearly time for his feeding. "You're looking at serious charges here," Detective Morris said, spreading photos across the metal table. "Harboring a fugitive, child endangerment. You could lose custody of your son." Tears pricked at her eyes, but Maribel straightened her spine. "I took in a father and child who needed help. That's all." "A convicted fraudster." Detective Parker cut in. "You expect us to believe you didn't know who he was?" "I found out later," Maribel admitted. "But by then I knew he wasn't dangerous. Just a father, protecting his son." "You're a single mother," Morris said, his voice softening with false sympathy. "Sleep-deprived, overwhelmed with a newborn. Maybe Roe manipulated you. If you cooperate now, tell us everything." "I'm tired, yes," Maribel said firmly. "But I'm not confused about right and wrong. I helped people in need. That's what my faith teaches me to do." The questioning went on for hours. They tried to twist her words, exploit her exhaustion, use her maternal instincts against her. Through it all, Elijah's cries grew more insistent. Finally, she put her foot down. "I need to feed my baby," she said. "Either charge me or let me go home." They released her with a warning that the investigation was ongoing. Maribel gathered Elijah in her arms, his tiny body trembling with hiccups from crying so long. "I'm here, sweet boy," she whispered. "Mama's here." But there was no time to rest. She had to see Noah. The Children's Services facility was sterile and impersonal. Noah sat, alone in a visiting room, his small shoulders hunched. When he saw Maribel, his face crumpled. "You came." he whispered. "Of course I did, honey." She settled beside him, Elijah cradled in one arm. "I promised I wouldn't leave you, remember?" Noah touched Elijah's tiny hand. "Is he okay?" "He misses you," Maribel said softly. She pulled out her phone, showing Noah pictures she'd taken of him holding the baby. "See, you're his big brother now. When can I come home?" Noah's voice broke. "I want my daddy. I want to help with Elijah again." Maribel's heart ached. "I'm doing everything I can, sweetheart. We have to be brave right now, okay? Like David in the Bible. Sometimes being brave means trusting God even when we're scared." She held him while he cried, humming the same lullaby she used to soothe Elijah. When visiting hours ended, she promised to return tomorrow. Back home, the silence was deafening. While Elijah napped, Maribel began gathering baby supplies, formula, diapers, wipes. She couldn't shake the fear that they might try to take him from her. As she moved the portable bassinet, something fluttered to the floor, a manila envelope wedged between the mattress and frame. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were financial documents, emails, bank statements. As she read, her breath caught. The papers showed a clear trail of Malcolm Rowe's fraudulent activities, how he had set up shell companies, falsified records, and framed his brother while stealing millions. This was enough evidence to clear Thaddeus's name, to reunite Noah with his father. But Malcolm Rowe was powerful, with connections throughout the city. If she came forward, she would be putting herself and Elijah in his crosshairs. Maribel looked at her sleeping son, so tiny and vulnerable. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to stay quiet, to protect her baby. But then she thought of Noah's tears, of Thaddeus's gentle way with both children, of the truth that needed to be told. "Lord, give me strength," she whispered, reaching for her phone to call Detective Morris. Sometimes doing right meant walking straight into the storm, trusting God to see you through. Her hands shook as she dialed, but her voice was steady. "Detective, I have something you need to see. But first, I want protection. For my son, for Noah, and for Thaddeus Rowe." She took a deep breath, holding the documents that could change everything. The path ahead would be hard, but she would face it with the same quiet courage that had led her to open her door on that snowy New Year's Eve. The sunlight filtering through Maribel's kitchen window felt harsh and unforgiving as she spread the documents across her small dining table. Elijah slept peacefully in his bassinet nearby, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Her hands trembled as she dialed the number she'd found after hours of research the night before. "Ruthlyn Avery speaking." The voice on the other end was sharp and precise. Maribel took a deep breath. "Ms. Avery, my name is Maribel Jameson. I have documents that expose corporate fraud at Rowe Developments. Would you be willing to meet?" There was a long pause. "The Thaddeus Rowe case? It's all over the news?" "Yes, but there's more to the story. Much more." Ruthlyn agreed to meet at a small coffee shop just 2 blocks from Maribel's house. The next morning, Maribel bundled Elijah carefully against the January chill, tucking the precious documents into his diaper bag. The coffee shop was nearly empty when she arrived, save for an older woman with silver hair and keen eyes sitting in a corner booth. "Mrs. Jameson." Ruthlyn stood, her posture straight and professional. Her eyes softened when she saw the sleeping baby. "Please sit." Maribel settled into the booth, positioning Elijah's carrier where she could keep a watchful eye on him. Her hands shook slightly as she withdrew the folder of documents. "Before we begin," Ruthlyn said quietly, "you should understand the risks. Malcolm Rowe isn't known for taking challenges lightly. I already lost my reputation." Maribel replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "They're threatening to take my baby, but I won't let an innocent man go to prison when I have proof of the truth." Ruthlyn's expression changed as she began examining the papers. Her eyes narrowed, and she pulled out a small notebook, making quick notes. "These transaction records?" she muttered. "The shell companies. Where did you get these?" "Thaddeus left them hidden in my house. I found them after they arrested him." For the next hour, Ruthlyn pored over every document while Maribel tended to Elijah, who woke hungry and fussy. As she fed him a bottle, Ruthlyn looked up with a spark in her eyes. "This is authentic. Malcolm didn't just frame his brother. He orchestrated one of the largest corporate frauds I've seen in 30 years of reporting." The next few days became a blur of exhaustion and anxiety. Maribel would wake at dawn to feed Elijah, then rush to work at the nursing home, her mind constantly worrying about the investigation. Her supervisor noticed her distraction. "Maribel, you've got circles under your eyes darker than I've ever seen," Sarah commented during their lunch break. "Are you sure you're ready to be back at work?" Maribel managed a weak smile. "Just normal new mom stuff," she lied, hating the deception, but knowing she couldn't risk word getting back to Malcolm's people. Every evening, after putting Elijah to bed, she would meet with Ruthlyn, going through more documents and connecting more dots. The retired journalist worked with fierce determination, her decades of experience showing in how quickly she traced the complex web of financial dealings. Malcolm created fake companies, Ruthlyn explained on their third night, spreading papers across Maribel's coffee table. He siphoned millions through them, then planted evidence making it look like Thaddeus was responsible. "The timestamps on these transfers prove it." Maribel nodded, fighting to stay awake as she gently rocked Elijah. "But will it be enough? We need to be thorough. Malcolm's lawyers will attack every detail." The stress began taking its toll. Maribel's milk supply dropped, forcing her to supplement more with formula. She jumped at every unexpected sound, feared every knock at the door. The social worker's visits became increasingly hostile, clearly pressured by forces beyond the local office. "Mrs. Jameson," the woman said during her latest inspection, "given the serious nature of the charges against Mr. Rowe, we have concerns about your judgment in allowing him access to your infant son." Maribel stood her ground. "I trusted my heart and my faith. I still do." One afternoon, she visited Noah at his temporary foster home. The boy ran to her, wrapping his arms around her legs. "I miss Daddy," he whispered, "and I miss you and baby Elijah." "We miss you too, sweetheart." Maribel held him close, breathing in the scent of his hair. Sometimes doing the right thing is hard, but we have to be brave. That night, after another long session with Ruthlyn, Maribel sat in her rocking chair, holding Elijah close. "Your daddy named you for a prophet who stood up to power," she whispered to her sleeping son. "I guess that's what we're doing too." The breakthrough came on day 5. Ruthlyn burst into Maribel's house, waving a stack of papers. "I found it! The smoking gun!" "Shh," Maribel whispered, pointing to Elijah, finally napping after a colicky morning. Ruthlyn lowered her voice but couldn't contain her excitement. "Malcolm made a mistake. He got sloppy with one of the shell companies. I traced it directly to his personal accounts." She spread the documents on the kitchen counter. "This isn't just evidence of Thaddeus's innocence, it's proof of Malcolm's guilt. This could bring down his entire empire." Maribel stared at the papers, her heart pounding. Will it be enough to free Thaddeus? To keep Noah safe? It's more than enough. Ruthlyn's eyes gleamed with the fire of justice long denied. Malcolm won't know what hit him. Every transaction, every fake company, every lie, it's all here. The evidence is bulletproof. Tears filled Maribel's eyes as relief flooded through her. She looked at her sleeping son, then at the documents that could change everything. When do we move forward? I have contacts at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Ruthlyn said, gathering the papers carefully. By this time tomorrow, Malcolm Rowe's carefully constructed house of cards will start to crumble. The weight of the past days pressed down on Maribel as she sank into a kitchen chair. She thought of Thaddeus in his cell, of Noah in foster care, of all the lives Malcolm had damaged in his greed. Sometimes faith meant more than just believing. It meant acting on what you believed was right, no matter the cost. Elijah stirred in his bassinet, making tiny snuffling sounds. Maribel reached over to stroke his cheek, marveling at how someone so small could give her the strength to face something so big. "Thank you," she said to Ruthlyn, her voice thick with emotion, "for believing me, for helping us." The older woman's face softened. "Thank you for having the courage to come forward. Not many would risk everything for the truth." They sat together in Maribel's small kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of Malcolm's crimes and the hope of justice to come. Outside, the winter sun was setting, casting long shadows across the floor. But for the first time in days, Maribel felt the warmth of hope pushing back against the cold. The morning sun barely penetrated the heavy clouds as Maribel walked up the courthouse steps, holding Elijah close against her chest in his baby carrier. Her heart thumped against her ribs, but her steps remained steady. Two men in expensive suits waited at the top of the stairs, their polished shoes and crisp ties marking them as clearly as neon signs would have. "Ms. Jameson," the taller one called out, his voice smooth as butter. "Do you have a moment?" Maribel adjusted Elijah's blanket, buying herself time to steady her nerves. "I need to feed my son before the hearing. This won't take long." The second man produced a leather portfolio. "We represent Malcolm Rowe's interests. He's prepared to be quite generous." Maribel's exhaustion from another sleepless night with Elijah transformed into sharp alertness. She'd expected this, but the reality still made her stomach clench. Inside a quiet conference room, they laid out their offer. The numbers they mentioned made her head spin. Enough money to secure Elijah's future, buy a house, never worry about bills again. All she had to do was sign a statement saying she'd misunderstood what she'd found in those documents. "Think about your son," the taller lawyer said, nodding toward Elijah, who was starting to fuss. "A single mother's life isn't easy. This could change everything for both of you." Maribel looked down at her baby, his tiny fingers curled around the edge of his blanket. She thought about Noah, alone in foster care, and Thaddeus sitting in a jail cell. The weight of their lives pressed against her heart. "You're right," she said softly, touching Elijah's cheek. "A single mother's life isn't easy. But it's harder to look your child in the eye knowing you sold out your principles for comfort." The shorter lawyer's face hardened. "Ms. Jameson, be reasonable. There could be complications. Child Services takes their responsibilities very seriously. Harboring a fugitive while caring for a newborn, that could raise questions about judgment." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Maribel felt her hands begin to shake, but her voice remained calm. "Are you threatening to have my baby taken away because I won't help cover up fraud? We're simply pointing out potential consequences of your choices." Maribel stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "My son is going to learn that his mama stands up for what's right, no matter how scared she is. That's worth more than any amount of money." She left them sitting there, their untouched papers spread across the table. In the hallway, she ducked into a quiet corner and held Elijah close, letting a few tears fall into his soft hair. "We're okay, baby," she whispered. "Mama's got you." The courtroom felt massive and cold when Maribel took the stand later that morning. She'd just finished nursing Elijah in a private room, and her church friend Sarah sat in the back row holding him. The baby's peaceful, sleeping face gave her strength. Malcolm Rowe sat at the defense table, looking exactly like his photos in the financial magazines. Expensive suit, perfectly groomed silver hair, confident smile. But his eyes were cold when they met hers, and she saw none of his brother's humanity there. "Ms. Jameson," Malcolm's attorney began, "isn't it true that you're struggling financially as a single mother?" "I work hard and provide for my son," Maribel answered simply. "And you took in 2 strangers, a man and his child, while caring for a 3-week-old infant? That seems rather reckless." Maribel took a deep breath. It was snowing. The child's lips were blue. "Would you have left them in the cold?" "I would have called proper authorities," he countered smoothly. "In my experience, sir, waiting for proper authorities while a child suffers isn't always the right answer. Sometimes being human means helping first and asking questions later." A murmur went through the courtroom. Malcolm's attorney shifted tactics, trying to paint her as naive, easily manipulated. But Maribel spoke from her heart about what she'd seen. A father protecting his son, a child who needed safety, documents that showed years of systematic fraud. "I'm not here because I understand corporate finance," she said clearly. "I'm here because I understand right from wrong. I'm here because my faith teaches me to help those in need, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." She described finding the documents, her decision to contact Ruthlin Avery, the threats she'd received. Her voice never wavered, even when she talked about the fear of losing her baby. From the gallery, she heard Elijah start to fuss. The judge called for a brief recess so she could tend to him. As she walked past Malcolm's table, she heard him mutter, "You should have taken the money." Maribel paused, turned, and looked him directly in the eye. "Mr. Rowe, I pray you'll remember what matters more than money before it's too late." During the lunch break, Maribel sat on a courthouse bench feeding Elijah, watching reporters cluster around their cameras outside. The morning news shows were already running clips of her testimony. "Single mother exposes billion-dollar fraud," scrolled across the bottom of the screens. Sarah brought her a sandwich and sat beside her. "You're doing the right thing," she said softly. "I know," Maribel replied, watching Elijah's peaceful face as he nursed. "But knowing doesn't make it less scary. That's what courage is, doing the right thing even when you're scared." The afternoon session brought more questions, more attempts to discredit her. But Maribel had spent years being underestimated. She'd learned patience dealing with difficult patients, clarity explaining medical issues to worried families, strength advocating for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Those skills served her well now. When Malcolm's lawyer tried to suggest she was seeking attention or fame, Maribel smiled gently. "Sir, I'm a nursing aide who just had a baby. The only attention I want is 8 straight hours of sleep." That earned a laugh from the courtroom, and she saw several jurors nodding in understanding. Even some reporters smiled. By late afternoon, the tide had turned. News coverage focused less on Malcolm's claims of persecution and more on Maribel's quiet dignity. They showed clips of her holding Elijah, talking about choosing right over easy. Social media lit up with support for the young mother standing up to corporate power. When court adjourned for the day, Maribel gathered her things slowly, exhausted but peaceful. She'd done what needed to be done. As she stepped into the hallway, she saw Ruthlin Avery waiting. The journalist's eyes were bright with satisfaction. "You did well in there," she said. "Malcolm's house of cards is starting to fall. His investors are asking questions he can't answer." Maribel nodded, too tired for celebration. "I just want Thaddeus free and Noah safe." "That's why you're winning," Ruthlin said softly. "Because this was never about money for you." Outside, The evening air felt clean and fresh after the stuffy courtroom. Maribel looked down at Elijah, now awake and watching the world with curious eyes. "Let's go home, little one," she whispered. "Mama did her best today." Maribel watched the morning news unfold on the small TV in her living room. Elijah nestled against her chest in his carrier. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned up the volume. The anchorwoman's crisp voice filled the quiet space. Breaking news in the Roe Industries scandal. New evidence has emerged that completely reverses the narrative surrounding Thaddeus Roe's alleged fraud. Documents submitted to federal investigators reveal an elaborate scheme orchestrated by Malcolm Roe to frame his older brother and seize control of the company. Tears welled in Maribel's eyes as financial charts and email screenshots flashed across the screen. The truth was finally coming to light. She gently stroked Elijah's back, his tiny breaths steady against her. "It's happening, baby boy," she whispered. "God makes a way." Her phone buzzed with a text from Ruthlyn. "Turn on Channel 7. Malcolm's being led out of his office in handcuffs." Maribel quickly switched channels. There, he was. Malcolm Roe, his perfectly pressed suit now wrinkled, his composed facade cracking as federal agents escorted him through a crowd of reporters. Camera flashes lit up his face like lightning strikes. "Mr. Roe, what do you say to allegations that you orchestrated this entire fraud?" "No comment," Malcolm snapped, ducking his head. "Is it true you fabricated evidence against your own brother?" Malcolm's jaw clenched, but he said nothing as they guided him into a waiting vehicle. Maribel's phone rang. It was her lawyer, speaking rapidly. "They're releasing Thaddeus within the hour. All charges dropped. The judge is issuing a full exoneration based on the new evidence. You should get down to the courthouse." Her heart raced as she gathered Elijah's diaper bag and tucked an extra blanket around him. The January morning was bright but bitterly cold. She called a cab, not trusting her shaking hands to drive. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had already gathered, reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers drawn to the dramatic turn of events. Maribel stood back from the chaos, keeping Elijah sheltered. She spotted Noah's social worker approaching with him. "Maribel!" Noah broke free and ran to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Is it true? Is Daddy coming home?" She hugged him close with her free arm. "Yes, sweetheart. Any minute now." The courthouse doors opened. A murmur rippled through the crowd as Thaddeus emerged, squinting in the winter sunlight. He looked thinner, his face unshaven, but his eyes were clear and steady. When he spotted Noah, his composure cracked. "Daddy!" Noah sprinted up the steps. Thaddeus dropped to his knees, catching his son in a fierce embrace. "Noah!" he choked out. "Oh, my boy." They clung to each other as cameras clicked rapidly around them. When Thaddeus finally looked up, his gaze found Maribel. She stood quietly at the bottom of the steps, Elijah sleeping peacefully against her chest. Slowly, holding Noah's hand, Thaddeus walked down to meet her. "Maribel," he said softly. His eyes were wet. "I don't know how to begin thanking you." She shook her head. "You don't need to." "Yes, I do." His voice was rough with emotion. "You risked everything. Your safety, your home, your baby's welfare, because of me. Because you showed mercy to strangers on your doorstep. I will never forgive myself for putting you and Elijah in danger." "Don't carry that guilt," Maribel said firmly. "Every choice I made freely. Faith without courage is empty. Sometimes doing right means taking risks." Elijah stirred, making tiny snuffling sounds. Thaddeus looked at the baby with tender concern. "He's grown. Babies do that." Maribel smiled. "Even when the world's falling apart, they just keep growing." Reporters pressed closer, shouting questions. "Mr. Roe, Will you be resuming control of Rowe Industries? What are your plans now that your name is cleared?" Thaddeus straightened, but his voice remained quiet. "No comment at this time. Please respect our privacy." As they walked away from the courthouse steps, he spoke quietly to Maribel. "I've been thinking, during all those hours in that cell, I don't want to go back to that life. The empire, the power games, the constant pressure to be bigger, richer, more powerful than everyone else. Look what it did to Malcolm. Look what really matters." He squeezed Noah's hand and glanced at Elijah. "I want something different now." "What will you do?" Maribel asked. "Start over. Something smaller, simpler. Focus on being a father." He paused. "I'd like to stay in the neighborhood if you're willing to help me find a place. Noah needs stability and—" He hesitated. "You and Elijah have become important to us." "We'd like that," Maribel said softly. Noah beamed up at her. They reached her cab, still waiting at the curb. The driver's eyes widened, recognizing Thaddeus from the news, but said nothing. "Come home with us," Maribel said. "You both need a proper meal, and we can start making plans." As they settled into the cab, Elijah woke with a small cry. Without hesitation, Thaddeus reached over to adjust the baby's blanket, his touch gentle and sure. Noah leaned against Maribel's side, peaceful for the first time in weeks. The cab pulled away from the courthouse, leaving behind the cameras and chaos. Maribel watched the winter sunlight glint off the snow, thinking how strange God's paths could be, how a simple act of opening a door on a cold night could change so many lives. She felt Thaddeus's grateful glance, saw Noah's contented smile, and knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The truth had finally won out, not through power or money or influence, but through small acts of courage, through choosing what was right over what was safe, through faith made real by action. Elijah stirred against her chest, and Maribel held him close, thankful for every step of this unexpected journey. The early spring, sunshine filtered through Maribel's kitchen window as she gently rocked Elijah in his carrier. At 3 months old now, he was growing stronger every day, his dark eyes tracking movement and his tiny hands reaching out to grasp at the world around him. The morning news played softly on her small radio, and she paused mid-motion when she heard Thaddeus's name. Former real estate mogul Thaddeus Rowe announced today the creation of the New Beginnings Housing Foundation, with an initial commitment of $50 million to support single-parent families and those rebuilding their lives. Maribel's phone buzzed with a text message from Thaddeus. "Turn on Channel 7. She reached for the remote and clicked on her small TV. There he was, standing at a podium, looking different than the desperate man who had appeared at her door that snowy night. He wore a simple suit, his manner humble but confident. "This foundation," Thaddeus was saying, "was born from personal experience. When I lost everything, a single mother with a newborn baby opened her door to me and my son. She showed me what real courage looks like, not in boardrooms or business deals, but in daily acts of compassion and truth-telling. Maribel Jameson taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the dignity we grant each other." Tears pricked at Maribel's eyes as she watched. Elijah cooed softly, and she stroked his cheek with her finger. The doorbell rang, and Maribel found Ruth Avery on her doorstep, the journalist's familiar, sharp eyes twinkling. "Quite a speech he's giving," Ruth said, stepping inside. "Have you seen the foundation's board structure?" Maribel shook her head, settling Elijah into his swing. "You're listed as the Executive Director of Community Relations, if you want it. Full salary, benefits, everything." Ruth pulled out some papers. "And there's more. They've set up an educational trust for Elijah." Maribel's hands trembled as she took the documents. "I never asked for any of this." That's exactly why he's offering it, Ruth said gently. He knows you don't need rescuing. This isn't about saving you. It's about recognizing your value. Later that afternoon, Thaddeus and Noah visited. While Noah played with Elijah, making silly faces that drew out the baby's first real laughs, Thaddeus and Maribel sat at her small kitchen table. I want you to know, Thaddeus said carefully. There are no strings attached to any of this. The position, Elijah's trust, they're yours regardless of what you decide about anything else. Maribel folded her hands in her lap. It's a lot to take in. The foundation will focus on more than just housing, Thaddeus explained. We'll provide legal support, job training, childcare assistance. Everything I learned I needed when I had nothing. Everything you showed me matters. And what about Malcolm? She asked softly. He's facing federal charges. But I'm not interested in revenge anymore. I want to build something meaningful instead of just acquiring wealth. He paused, watching Noah gentle touch Elijah's tiny hand. You changed me, Maribel. You showed me what real strength looks like. Maribel stood and walked to the window, needing space to think. The street outside was quiet, so different from those tense days when suspicious cars had lurked there. I need to maintain my independence, she said finally, for Elijah's sake and for my own. I understand completely. Thaddeus replied. That's why everything is structured separately. Your position, if you want it, reports to the board, not to me. Elijah's trust is irrevocable and independent. You don't owe me anything. She turned back to face him. Why? Thaddeus stood slowly, his expression open and vulnerable. Because you taught me about dignity when I'd lost mine. Because you risked everything to protect not just me and Noah, but the truth itself. Because... He hesitated, then continued softly. Because I've fallen in love with your courage, your faith, and your heart. Maribel's breath caught. She watched Noah holding Elijah's bottle now, Thaddeus having taught him the proper way, both boys content in each other's company. I'm not asking for an answer, Thaddeus said quietly. I'm just asking if you'd consider, somewhere down the road, building a life together. Not because either of us needs saving, but because we make each other better people. It won't be easy, Maribel said. People will talk. They'll assume things. Let them, Thaddeus replied. We know the truth. That's what matters. Maribel walked over to where the boys sat. She lifted Elijah gently, breathing in his sweet baby smell. I'll take the position, she said finally. But on my terms, I'll stay in my house. I'll keep my nursing aide job part-time. Those people need me. And we'll take things slow. Thaddeus smiled, relief and joy lighting his features. I wouldn't have it any other way. Noah looked up at them both. Does this mean we can visit more? Maribel reached out and squeezed his shoulder. Yes, sweet boy. We'll figure it out together. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, warming the small living room. Elijah had fallen asleep in Maribel's arms, his tiny fingers curled around one of hers. She thought about that snowy night, about opening her door to strangers, about choosing faith over fear. The foundation needs a motto, Thaddeus said softly, watching them. Faith without courage is empty. Maribel replied, remembering her words outside the courthouse. But faith with courage can change the world. Noah leaned against her side, and she felt Thaddeus's steady presence nearby, not crowding, not demanding, just offering possibility. Tomorrow there would be decisions to make, work to be done, lives to change. But for now, in this moment, she felt the quiet rightness of choosing her own path, of accepting opportunity without surrendering independence, of allowing love to grow at its own pace. Sunlight streamed through the freshly washed windows of Maribel's row house, carrying with it the sweet scent of spring blossoms. The morning light painted warm patterns across the living room floor, where 6-year-old Noah sat cross-legged with a children's book propped on his knees. And the little engine said, "I think I can, I think I can." Noah read carefully, his finger tracking each word. He glanced up periodically at Maribel, who sat in her favorite rocking chair with 4-month-old Elijah nestled against her chest. Maribel smiled encouragingly, gently patting Elijah's back as he dozed. The baby had grown so much since that snowy New Year's Eve, his tiny features now fuller and more defined. His dark curls were starting to come in, and his sleep schedule had finally settled into something manageable. "You're doing great, Noah," she whispered, careful not to wake Elijah. "Your reading has improved so much." Noah beamed at the praise, his whole face lighting up. The change in him over these past months was remarkable. Gone was the frightened boy who had arrived at her door trembling from cold and uncertainty. In his place sat a confident child who knew he was loved and secure. The sound of kitchen cabinets opening and closing drifted in from the other room, where Thaddeus was preparing Sunday breakfast. The familiar domestic sounds filled Maribel with a deep sense of peace. How different things were now from those first desperate days when he'd been a stranger in her home, both of them walking on eggshells around each other. "Breakfast is almost ready," Thaddeus called softly from the kitchen. "We don't want to be late for church." Church. Maribel's heart swelled at how naturally they now attended services together, no more worried glances or whispered judgments from the congregation. The same people who had once cast suspicious looks now greeted them warmly each Sunday, having witnessed firsthand how faith and compassion could transform lives. Noah carefully closed his book and stood up. "Can I help set the table, Dad?" "Of course, buddy," Thaddeus replied. Maribel watched them work together through the kitchen doorway, their movements comfortable and coordinated. Thaddeus had changed profoundly from the proud billionaire who'd lost everything. His humility wasn't an act anymore, it was who he'd become, shaped by grace and second chances. The housing foundation he'd established was thriving, but not in the way his previous empire had operated. Instead of luxury developments, they focused on creating stable homes for families in crisis, particularly single parents. Every decision was made with transparency and compassion, guided by the lessons they'd learned during those winter days of dependency and trust. Elijah stirred against her chest, making tiny snuffling sounds as he woke. Maribel adjusted him gently, looking down into his dark eyes that seemed wise beyond his months. "Good morning, little one," she murmured. Sometimes it still amazed her how one decision, made in bone-deep exhaustion while holding her newborn son, had rippled out to touch so many lives. She'd been so afraid that night, standing at her door with snow swirling around her feet. Every logical reason had screamed at her to keep it closed, to protect herself and her tiny baby from strangers. But faith had whispered louder than fear. "Maribel?" Thaddeus stood in the doorway, dish towel over his shoulder. "Would you like me to take him while you get ready?" She nodded, carefully transferring Elijah to his arms. The easy trust between them now was hard-won, forged through trials and testimony, through standing together when it would have been easier to stand apart. "Remember when you could barely hold him?" She teased gently. Thaddeus laughed softly. "I was terrified I'd break him. Now look at us." He swayed slightly, natural and comfortable with the baby in his arms. "Who would have thought that New Year's Eve would change everything? God knew!" Maribel said simply, standing up and straightening her skirt. "Even when we didn't." Noah came to stand beside his father, reaching up to touch Elijah's tiny hand. The baby immediately gripped his finger, causing Noah to giggle. "He's so strong now, just like his mama," Thaddeus said, meeting Maribel's eyes with warmth and respect. As she headed upstairs to change for church, Maribel paused at the landing, taking in the scene below. Her home was full of morning light and gentle voices, of safety and second chances. The fear and exhaustion of those early days had given way to something beautiful, not perfect, but real and lasting. She thought about the young mothers she now mentored through the foundation, women who reminded her of herself in those first overwhelming weeks of motherhood. She could tell them with complete conviction that compassion wasn't weakness. It was transformation in action. Every time she shared her story, she saw hope kindle in their eyes. Later, as they walked into church together, Elijah secured in his carrier, Noah holding both their hands, Maribel felt the rightness of it all settle deep in her bones. The congregation's friendly greetings wrapped around them like a warm embrace. Pastor Jenkins nodded in particular welcome, remembering that first Sunday when they'd arrived as strangers seeking shelter from the storm. They settled into their usual pew, and Maribel breathed in the familiar scents of wood polish and well-worn hymnals. Elijah was awake now, his dark eyes taking in the colored light from the stained glass windows. Noah leaned against her side, content and secure. The organist began to play softly, and Maribel felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude. She thought about that exhausted, frightened woman she'd been, standing at her door in the snow with a newborn in her arms. If she could go back and whisper to herself, she would say, "Trust this moment. Trust that compassion opens doors we cannot see. Trust that one act of faith can change generations." Thaddeus reached over and squeezed her hand gently, understanding without words. They had all been transformed by that snowy night, from strangers to family, from fear to faith, from loss to abundance, not in wealth as the world measured it, but in the currency of love, trust, and second chances. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass, painting them all in colors of hope and promise. Elijah cooed softly in his carrier, and Noah hummed along with the organ. Maribel sat straight and strong, knowing with unshakable certainty that compassion had not weakened her. It had revealed her true strength, a strength that would echo in the lives of her children and beyond. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.